So good morning, everyone. I changed this presentation, much to the annoyance of the host of this conference, quite a bit, based on just speaking with so many different people here and seeing the challenges you face. So I'm really going to go into in this presentation how the data scrapers out there work. So I'm going to talk through what AirDNA does, but I'm sure if Price Labs or Beyond Pricing, if Ian and Anurag were here, they do something similar. We're not the same and we have different methodologies, but there's kind of a standardized way to go about how you'd look into using masses of scraped data to be able to give data and pricing insights to the vacation rental community. So this AirDNA, we've been around since 2015. We have historically focused on just the data, so trying to explain to vacation rental managers, to real estate investors, to tourism boards, just what is short-term rentals. We started off with Airbnb and now have HomeAway incorporated. And this is kind of the vision of where we are still looking to go. So we're trying to support people who are interested in the short-term rental industry to go from property selection initially, so maybe for the little guy who has one Airbnb or one holiday home, or is looking to buy their first holiday home and wants to see, can they afford this holiday home? What could it earn as a short-term rental whilst they're exploring whether to make that initial purchase, through to much larger companies looking to make much more material investments. And then once you have your property, how do you get it right? So my co-founder and I both had very small Airbnb empires. I had one place in London, and when an empire, and you know, you chuckle, when we got into this, we thought, there's a lot of money you can make with these short-term rentals, but thought, what we're doing, I'm not sure this is quite legal or going to be legal for the long term. So we took the attitude of, if there's a gold rush happening, didn't the people who sold the shovels make all the money rather than the people who were digging for gold? So we realized there was a real absence of data out there at all at the time. So that's how we kind of got into this business. And then once I had my Airbnb in Covent Garden, just the little things like, what should my cleaning fee be? I didn't know. I mean, I cleaned it myself. Should I be charging, how much should I charge for my labor, just as a small-time operator? So just having the knowledge that in your market, the average cleaning fee is $50 or whatever it was just the kind of information we were looking to provide to the folks out there. So listing optimization, dynamic pricing. So this is a new arm of our business. We're in beta at the moment. I'll talk through in quite a bit of this presentation what that involves and how we've been setting about it, and so hopefully some of the advantages of going through dynamic pricing. And then finally, and this is something I've heard so much here, is competitive benchmarking. That over and again, I've had the conversation with people that they've come here, they think they're doing okay, but they have no reference point to know whether their revenue management strategies are at the top or at the bottom, somewhere in the middle. So we also try and support ways of seeing how you're doing against your competitive set. And all the conversations we've had with customers over time, it's always surprised me as, you know, we were outsiders to this industry, and a hotelier would have understood this much faster, much quicker. But it's very important to know how you're doing versus your competitive set, because if the market's doing well and you're doing well, it's very tempting to pat yourself on the back to think, no, I've done really well here. You know, I'm 8% up on last year. But if the market, say, happens to be up 20%, well, actually, you haven't done well because you've underperformed the market, and vice versa. If the market's been static and you've done really well, we'll carry on and continue doing what you're doing. So I think it's important for folks out there to understand how they're doing relative to their market, so they know whether they need to put the effort into improving their revenue management strategies, or maybe they're killing it in revenue management and some of the operational features, the marketing, that's where they should be spending their hours. And this is why it's been a good market for, in general, is short-term rentals, as we all know, has changed significantly. The presence of Airbnb in the marketplace gave it a fillip that it was lacking before. It started with Vrbo, HomeAway, Vrbo again now, and now Booking.com has entered the fray. And from being something of an outpost that was much more focused on just traditional vacations, it's now everywhere throughout the ecosystem of travel and is always the hot topic of these conferences. So that's continued to grow. Between ourselves and Skift, we have this at 10 million around the world now. So Amy, in the latest edition of VRM Intel, I'm sure you all read diligently, and that's how you're at this conference, she talked about how, and we've heard it before, that there's still going to be another disruptor here. We've got Airbnb and HomeAway and Booking.com duking it out, but we all see difficulties in working with those OTAs. Maybe their fees are too high. There's a lot of frustration with the way they operate for vacation rental managers. So I think it's important we all think that what we're trying to figure out today, that's going to move as well. We have to be able to respond to the latest thing that comes up in distribution, how that's going to change, and be able to incorporate that into our thinking. That if you sat yourself in a dark room for 2 years and came up with the perfect strategy for how to run your vacation rental business, step back out to present it to the world, and it will be out of date. The way Airbnb are changing, the way they interact with their host, the way they're trying to channel you into a single platform, all these are factors that you're going to have to bring in as they change. So, but the subject of today is optimal pricing is paramount for revenue. So this is the area that we're really going to drill down into. What I'm really going to talk about is how you need to keep moving on pricing, because even if you were to do some competitive benchmarking and see, yeah, I've done really well compared to the market, I'm outperforming the market, but then your competitors are also going to start looking at some of the tools that a lot of the vendors are providing here today and try and really see how they can professionalize faster. Just because your pricing was good last year, if the other people who are in your market improve their pricing and their skills and their way of drawing people in, then you're going to do relatively worse. So even if you're doing well, you really have to keep moving. But the good news is, I think this industry is going to continue to grow, that the thirst for supply is out there, that 4 or 5 years ago, there was the segmented vacation rental managers in traditional markets. And then came, I was talking with Simon earlier about the young pirates that came in, who were kind of sketchy, laws, taxes, they kind of avoided in the initial phase. In they came, and they, rented a few places, rented them out again. But those folks have realized they can't do that continually, and they've got legal as well. And so that thirst for legal, legitimate supply makes them legitimate actors in everyone's market as they pick up the skills and how to fully run a proper professional organization with cleaners who are paying their national insurance contributions and all these elements that you guys had to suffer with whilst the young pirates are in there and ignoring all those things. There's very little space for pirates anymore. We see it in all the major cities that they've got pretty good at clamping down on people who are running illegal operations, and that enforcement of proper regulations is just going to grow. But those people who started off as pirates are now working for the Royal Navy. So they've changed their ethos, and now they're following the rules and are legitimate competitors as they stretch out into traditional vacation rental marketplaces. But demand continues to grow also, that folks who would never have considered a vacation rental 5 years ago, now it's part of every calculation. I'm going on a trip, be it for work, be it for holiday, which suits me best? Is it a hotel, a service apartment, a vacation rental? So we can all feel confident that demand will continue to grow. So there's this dream out there that a lot of the vendors are chasing of this low-cost, dynamic, accurate, and fully automated pricing. Pricing is no longer something you think about. The perfect machine has come out. You press the button once to set up. It charges you a token fee, and this is never something you have to think about in your business again. But as I'm sure as you've interrogated the different options, looked at doing it yourself, spoken with all the vendors, no one is there today to make that the perfect solution for everyone. And we've also talked about how vacation rentals are different and why this is a problem. We've had quite a few speakers talk about how, with hotels, they're kind of the same. There's 200 blocks are the same. You can kind of commoditize them, whip them, drive them into your algorithms. And with vacation rentals, they're so difficult because they're all so vacation rentals are necessarily also different. We saw the example yesterday of two seemingly identical looking large houses, but inside one was really well furnished, top end, the other one had the whiff of IKEA around all the furnishings, less thought put into them. So they weren't the same. So even though the data scrapers like us are seeing the 4-bedroom with these facilities, we're still a way away from picking out that is a really high-end home with great views versus the one that has been more mediocrely furnished and doesn't have quite the same levels of service. So it's something we're working on. But I guess, and that's where we are today, that there isn't a machine that can do everything for you, for everyone. Like maybe if you have one property, you don't want to put so much time into pricing, having a dynamic pricing tool you just plug in will be significantly better than you just flat pricing through the whole year. Or maybe your day job as a surgeon precludes you from putting as much time into pricing as you'd like, and there are good machines that can do that, and they will be better than what you'd be doing yourself because you don't have the time. But for serious professionals, I don't think there's anything yet on the market that can do it all for you. But I wouldn't say that's not going to be the same forever. When we think about how there's been other speakers talking about the pace of technological change, and it's not far away in the future where you could see, right, here's a list of 40 photos, and there'll be some completely unrelated business, possibly in real estate, who'll develop the technology to make a reasonable assessment of that apartment, reasonable assessment of that house, all from the photos. They could draw out the dimensions, assess the quality. That is not 10 years in the future. That's fewer than 10 years in the future. So just because today there's still that human element, all the time the technology being developed in other fields that can be brought into our field, that's going to continue to change. So once again, if you've gone away for 2 years and hidden in a dark room building out the perfect revenue management strategy, it won't be current because the vendors here will be looking out for these new technologies. They'll be incorporating them into their products. So things are going to change, and I think in the future, maybe there will be that one, there'll be several vendors, all very low cost, all doing a very nice job of bringing in the perfect pricing, but we're not there yet. So the real content of my presentation today is just to talk about how our firm brings together the information and the data to make the product we have. But I think for the other Price Labs or Beyond Pricing could come up here and give a very similar presentation. Maybe they took a slightly different decision here, a slightly different decision there, but it's the same principles that run when you try and take in masses of data to be able to build out effective pricing and effective benchmarking and effective property selection. So there's 3 main components that we have that help us build out our pricing recommendations. And when I say pricing recommendations, much of this applies to the other things we do to see how your neighbor's doing, to see the tool Sarah demonstrated yesterday where you type in any address and it will tell you how much that place could earn as a short-term rental. These are the sort of the pillars that go into this. And the first one is the reservation algorithm. So when we look at scrape data, what we're doing, what's really happening there is we have our computers are going through Airbnb and Vrbo's website all day, every day, hoovering up the 7-8 million listings, analyzing them for changes, and seeing what is current supply, what is current pricing, but also what are current reservations. So the way we do this, and there are many approaches out there, we were fortunate enough in 2015, when we were first picking up this information, that Airbnb was showing this information. So when you look at a calendar on Airbnb, you can see it's white or gray. And if it's gray, you can't book it. It is U, unavailable. And if it's white, it's A, available. But when we first started getting into this business, we could see 3 letters. It was A, available, R, reserved, or B, blocked. When we started picking up this information, we picked up maybe 40 million reservations over time. And from that, we were able to discern what are the characteristics of a reservation. So when it's a well-booked out property, 11 days in advance, a Friday to Sunday block goes from white to gray, the algorithm that we built out based on that historical information will compute that, yup, that shows every characteristic of a reservation. Let's mark that as a reserved. Similarly, you could be 4 months out, and a calendar for all of June and July just goes overnight from white to grey. That looks a lot more like someone who's blocked that out for their own use for the summer. So we're not putting that in our data anywhere. That is a block day. And that, the truth data set that we had has enabled us to build that out. And of course, there'll still be mistakes that where it falls foul a bit is when someone's doing something really irregular. They're turning it off, they're turning it on, they're changing it around. So scraped data is not perfect. But of the mass that we have, of the 12,000 customers we've had in the last 12 months, who all first thing they do is look at their own property to see how much that earned, the amount of times where people have been annoyed at the differential, I can count on 2 hands out of all of those people. So it does go wrong, but in the main, this is accurate information. Also, we know we're at a point in time. Oh, and I may say HomeAways continue to reveal in about 30% of their listings that real reservation information. So we're continuing to get real-time information on the bookings of these properties. But also, you don't want to stay at a single point in time. So over time, we too have signed up data partnerships with different providers out there. So we have about 350,000 real reservations feeding into our system. And we're not presenting those reservations. What we're doing is using those to continue to train this algorithm. So you have an algorithm that's predicting the difference between reserved and blocked. You need to have that updated with fresh, real, true information so the algorithm can use its machine learning component to examine that and see, are habits changing? Are things moving? And the algorithm will microscopically adjust what it considers a reservation to a block day. So that, in essence, is how the scrape data business works. So you're pulling in this information. You need to look at these listings every day because the timing of the change is so important when you're considering, was it reserved or blocked? Being able to see the time that when that happened is a crucial part of it. So the next part of having a good overview of the industry is matching the properties. All right, so the data partnerships I was discussing, and these are some of the people who've contributed the data sets to our partnerships, the ones who've kindly agreed to be publicly contributors to this. So the way the partnerships have worked with these different folks is we provide them different data services. They provide us anonymized data in order to train our model. So what you get, though, by being a scrape data company is you can talk about specific properties. That is the advantage. And we've had vague conversations with the big OTOs about ways we could partner. Particularly, they're interested in the work we do with tourism boards, to present the right picture. They've had some difficulties with trust in what they've presented to the world before. But it just doesn't work for us because I think for us to be really useful to people looking to invest, you need to isolate each property and say this is this property's performance to be able to give a good story for people looking to invest. So if you go onto our site, you can see, right, here I'm going to type in the address and see how much that property would earn. And our data science will give out a number, but also will show you the comparables. Say, right, this property earned this much, this property earned this much. And then you can take a personalized view. Well, that property earned 140,000. It's a 2-bedder, but it's got a really nice sea view because you can go into the listing, have a look around. It's got 300 reviews. It seems a really well put together production. So you can know that no matter the answer that our algorithm has given, you can see yourself that the 2-bedroom property I'm looking at is 3 rows back from the beach. It's just not as nice, even though the amenities seem to say it's the same. So by having this scrape data, you can really drill down into individual properties rather than, of course, when you have a data partnership, there's a lot of anonymity and you can't declare these things, and you can get a great overview of the marketplace as a whole down to the zip code level. But it's very difficult to really isolate properties for your own analysis. So let's move on to the matching algorithm. So when we first incorporated HomeAway, we had this problem that we were incorporating HomeAway data and Airbnb data, but are we double counting? That is the big problem, because so many people are on both platforms. So that's once again a number of iterations of data science to think, are they the same? Because some of them are obvious. Same photos, same descriptions, boom, you do a text match, it's done. They're the same number of bedrooms, about in the same area, they're the same property. but it has been a tremendous amount of iterations to try and say, are these the same property? Now, of course, with the sanction data, that's easy because it's in the information that's been provided. You're getting the Airbnb ID, the HomeAway ID, and boom, you know that's the same property. So with scrape data, you have to work a lot harder to be able to figure out that you're not overestimating the market. So there's a lot of work goes into this. I think there's 16 different ways in which each listing is looked at, from the obvious ones like bedrooms and proximity, but that's not enough to a match. So are there text strings that match? Are there photos that match? There's technology that we're looking at the moment that can look at photos from all different parts of the room and say, boom, that's the same room. So getting that matching right is an extremely important part of scrape data. Okay, and then this is the final part, which we are just entering the fray at. We've spent about 8 months in the shadows working on this. There's been about a team that's fluctuated between 7 and 10, trying to work out the best way to price properties. It turns out it's hard. I think it's harder than we thought about when we went into this, because you have to get all the inputs right, and then also you think, what are you going to do with this data? So what goes into the pricing inputs? So I'm going to talk through these a little, but booking demand is the most important one by far. How are you going to get the right information for how demand's coming into the system? And the hard part of that, and why it's been difficult before, is you have to know what real reservations are coming in for an effective model. So you could just look at, when I talked about A, available, U, unavailable, now that's a proxy, but it's much more meaningful to know how many reservations are coming into that large market, that micro market at the same time. And when I talk about technological advances, if we'd have tried to do this 5 years ago, it just wouldn't have been possible. Because if you think that we're looking at these 10 million listings every day, and then our model is whirring around trying to calculate, is that a reservation or a block day? And then also, by getting into pricing, we're doing this 6 months ahead. Every day, it's reassessing the 10 million properties times the 180 days ahead. And these are enormous numbers, and only is computing power got to the stage that this is possible now. And even then, that has taken endless back-end engineering to smooth out the lines to make that a product that can update, and we're not in real time, but update overnight every day to give you a new perspective on the pricing. And I'm sure if Anurag or Ian was up here as well, they could talk through the struggles of being able to just harness that amount of data and turn that into meaningful data in the time frame that your end users want to use. So we're going into this here. So booking demand, how many rentals are booked? What percentage of rentals have been booked? And what is the pickup rate? So Anurag did a nice description of yesterday of some of the ways you can look at how you're pricing. And the pickup rate, he had this nice chart for, so it was for September, and how many days out are you? How are you on the curve compared to last year? How's that comparing to the market? How's that comparing to other markets? So this is kind of important information you need to input into your model to see what is booking demand at now versus last year. So in our tool at the moment, like I said, we have this in beta in our Market Minder tool at the moment, but this is where we're getting to on this tool, is we're seeing for each day, for these days in the future, occupancy is at 55%, and then we're saying, how does your rate of 130 compare to the market rate? And also that booking score, the top, the 8 high demand, is saying, how's this comparing to a typical day? How's this compare? Should you be looking at this a high demand day or a medium demand day? And until 2 weeks ago, this was the extent of where our tool went to, because this was an important step we needed to build in terms of building out that pricing algorithm, is to be able to isolate which are high demand days, getting that demand score right. The second thing you need to look at is, as all hoteliers will tell you, we had a great speech on the first morning talking us through the history of how hotels will deal with data, and you still can't ignore that the best guide to what you should be at this year is what happened last year. So if you, for your high demand days for July the 4th, how much could you charge last year? And that's kind of the barometer to know how much you can charge this year. You've probably got a number of years experience understanding what July the 4th is in your market, that you know that year that you got $500, and then that year where you tried to get 600 and couldn't get it and had to sink it at the last minute. So that seasonality, how did that property, how did that market perform last year, is a key input into any effective pricing model. And then I'd say this is the hardest part of all of looking through pricing algorithms, is the base rate. So when we talk about other industries we can lean on, airlines, hotels, non-travel related industries to get that pricing right. What you're talking about then is matching demand and supply, and how can that work to be able to give you the optimal revenue at the end. But the base rate is what makes vacation rentals so tricky, because what is the base rate? Everyone is so unique that how can you really determine the base rate? So the best way of determining a base rate is to have an industry expert who knows the property well, who can set that at the start, have a really good feel for how that compares to other, what should it earn on a normal day, and what is that rate to be. And the base rate is a prerequisite for an effective pricing algorithm to go on the top of it. So what have we done with base rate? So we tried really hard for people who need some help, because it's fine if it's your market, you've been in that market for 10 years, you know that property, you have a really strong feeling for what that base rate is. But we also appreciate that when you acquire a new property, say, in a different market, where you can have a good guess at the base rate, but you don't feel so confident, it's not your territory, is we've worked hard at being able to calculate what a base rate is. So what we've done for that is we take the property, we take the main amenities of the property. Does it have a swimming pool? Does it have a hot tub? Does it have a parking space? We've drawn around up to 100 competitors to that property to say which is the most comparable. And of course, remember, as I said before, the machine is still not capturing how nice that 2-bedroom property is, because it might be right at the top end, and you have to personally make that adjustment to say, no, that's at the top end, this isn't quite right, it's average, that's about right, it's at the lower end, it's next to a railway tracks, this isn't going to be the perfect number. But what we've tried to do is draw in those comparables and get a localized comp set. And then this is another element of the data science you need to go into to try and make that effective. Because particularly in urban markets, a lot of properties are on and off all the time. Very few are listed out for 365 days a year. So if you only take the properties that were listed for the whole year, you're not going to have enough data to make an effective base rate. So we went through a big process of trying to seasonally adjust properties. So what does that mean? If you were to take a property in Destin, Florida, that was only listed for July and August, it was available for 60 days, booked for 55 of them, and it was attracting a rate on average of $400 a night, a RevPAR of $360 a night. You can't really extrapolate that and say, oh, well, we'll just times that by 6, and that's 12 months, and that's how much that property would earn, because it's not earning that in January. So we went through a process of, well, this is what it earned in July and August. What did the market earn in the rest of the season? What did the market earn in the shoulder season? What did the market earn in January? And then we can extrapolate how much that place would likely have earned if it was a property on the whole year. So that's the process we went through to try and get that base rate right. That you have to consider what the competitors are, what the seasonality of when those reservations were, so you have a meaningful data set. And then still, the man needs to augment or woman, of course, to augment the artificial intelligence to say, well, no, but this property is particularly nice. It's got a killer view. It's the best property in the area. And yeah, it's got 2 beds and a hot tub, but it's far superior to the comparisons. So that's where the human still needs to come in to keep an eye on the machine to make sure it's acting appropriately. But once again, I still think in 2-3 years, the machine will advance further and further, and that particular problem may disappear, and there'll be other elements where the human has to provide that expertise on the top. So booking lead time is also an important factor, and I don't think this is news to anyone in this room who's been working in revenue management to know what kind of rates you want to be booked at for the summer in February. And if you're an urban market, probably very little, but if you're in a traditional vacation market, you should have been pulling people in by now. And speaking to folks here, a lot of you have 60%, 70% repeat customers from the previous year, and you can get them at the end of their holiday. You can say, oh, well, did you have a nice holiday? Well, you know, home's selling out fast. You could get exactly the same place with the same view at a good price next year and have them booked up a year in advance. But speaking to Alex down the front here, whose properties are in Las Vegas, doesn't work for them when people at the end of their holiday in Vegas are never coming back again. Ever, ever, ever. He'll have to wait a bit longer to lure them back in. So it depends on your market, of course. But the booking lead times, Airbnb on average, across the entire Airbnb, the booking lead time is 21 days. That's really short, I think, for most of the people in this room. But understanding where the booking lead time is for your market is an important part of the model. Now, I say it's an important part of the model because what we model builders try to do is try and build out a model that works in every single market in the world. So our coverage is 100% global, which is nice for the folks in Taiwan who are looking to get pricing options because there isn't a localized model, but also has constraints on how much you can tailor local knowledge to each market. So whilst the people localized in the market will have a really good idea of booking lead time if they've been there for a couple of years, our model needs to know it. So we analyze all the reservations and how far in advance they happened for the different seasons as an important input into this pricing algorithm. Okay, and then comes the outputs. So I didn't build this model. And this decision, I hear, was a very important and contentious decision in how to make an effective model work. But there are various different modes of building out the machine learning components in your model to understand how to build out the best pricing algorithm. So this is a Boost XG, apparently. And why this is the preferred model for building out pricing algorithms at the moment is the speed of calculation it can work at. So I mentioned before, for all those 10 million properties, you then have to look 180 days into the future to be able to build out an effective model, and then you have to run all your calculations. And it's not a simple calculation, because one, you have to work out the reservation days, and then as you're building out your price algorithm effectively, you have to take the property that's the subject of your pricing algorithm, calculate that fast, bring in all the different factors we talked about, the seasonality, the inputs, what demand is at the moment, what the typical lead time is for that market, and spit out that calculation in a speed that's useful enough for your end users. So as I refer back to 5 years ago, this kind of stuff was extremely difficult to do. You'd need rooms and rooms of computers, but with cloud computing now, computing on demand, it's become a lot more effective to do that. And then I think that's underestimated how much computing power is needed to build out these kind of algorithms. Our Amazon bill is just stratospheric. Now we've built out all these calculations that are happening all the time in real time. And then you've got the human factor. And this is where we found with our model, we talk quite a bit about the human factor in there. But there's events that clearly, 9 months in the future, our model is not reading. And it's something we've worked really hard at, and there needs to be continued work and developments to make this right. That if you have the Super Bowl in your city, and that is announced some years in advance, I believe, and you've got properties, you need to be on top of when that Super Bowl is. Because when we look at the data, we're not picking up anything yet, because it's an urban market, the average lead time is 20 days, the reservations that you're looking at will be 260 days in the future. There won't be enough meaningful amount of data. There won't be enough meaningful tremors in the data scraped information coming into a model to be able to quickly identify that there's a Super Bowl 9 months out. So when you are sitting in your town in, say, Atlanta, and the Super Bowl is announced here next year, I'm sure it has been announced, I'm not familiar with where it is, but you've got to think, right, well, that's my town. That's going to be a huge event. First thing you should do is probably take your places off the market, just so you can have a think and see what's happening in the market here. But if you just let the machines do everything from here, the machine won't know that that announcement's just been made, and some sniper will come in, pick up your property at a pretty mediocre price, and then either you go through the PR problem of, oh, maybe we could cancel that, you consider it, you're losing out a lot of money, or you maintain your integrity and keep the reservation, but you've just missed out on maybe the biggest payday that's going to happen in your city. So overall, I mean, this is the real crux of this presentation, crux of this message is the machines aren't ready for everything yet. They can do so much for you. They can takes so much of the heavy lifting away. Our tool has pricing. Us scraping database algorithm people are trying to work with is to give you that information in the right format that's useful. Because some people, we talked about our surgeon before who hasn't got time for this stuff. He's busy performing intensive operations and doesn't want to spend his evenings drowning through pricing. For him, a set and forget is probably the best thing, as he doesn't have the time to go through this. Whereas someone whose job it is full time, they want a bit more information because they have to tell their owners why they weren't filled on this day or why their revenue was this day, and they need the information. And if you can say to them, well, the reason I set this price was it was an 8% higher demand date than normal. This is the booking lead time was here. This is all the factors that went into why I made this decision. You can feel a lot more robust telling the homeowners that, okay, so maybe the outcome wasn't ideal, but feel good that the decision I made was right at the time. And so you can have a good amount of evidence to say, this is why this decision was made. So this is, I'm sure you've seen this at many data-style conferences, that you have to be careful with the data that you're using, that the limited data sets can lead to faulty conclusions. This was something one of the folks in the office saw that they thought was quite droll, that it seems the best way to reduce murders by steam is to reduce the age of Miss America. And it seems if you get that down, then the murders and steam goes down. But it's a classic example. You've seen this in so many different places where you can see a correlation, but without putting real advanced data science and thinking, why did this happen? What are the causes? What's the P stat? What's the T stat of what's the statistical analysis for why this happened? Then you're only kind of guessing into the future. So I think the level of sophistication that's coming into this marketplace amongst all of the vendors is only going to improve and improve over time, because that is the nature of technology. And there's some formidable, hungry companies out there in the foyer who are all working to try and make your lives easier in the best way they can, and they'll all have different approaches over time. So I think overall, you can feel confident that the world will be moving in the right direction to make pricing easier for you, as long as you're keeping familiar with the tools, keeping familiar with the vendors, seeing when, okay, maybe they're not right for me at the moment, but they've just made this development. Oh yeah, that really solves a problem for me now. So now it's time to move ahead with one of them because they've hit our problem. And as long as you guys keeping an eye on us and being open to buying, even if you're not buying today, then those improvements will continually happen. And you have to feel that you coming to Atlanta Airport in August, the busiest time of your year, shows your commitment to this cause. So I'm sure you're going to be ahead of that game, and you do have to beat out your competitors. So the fact you're here, the fact you're researching is going to put you ahead of all your competitors. So pat yourselves on the back. So just to summarize what we've talked about today, you need robust historical and future performance data to build out the right kind of models, to make the right kind of informed decisions. You need to make sure, as a firm like us, you've matched across the listings, you're not double counting anywhere. You need to make the right rate adjustments by bringing in the right inputs that are calculated fast enough to be able to deliver that. And then you need to account for the localization of your area. This is a good example of Atlanta that during the Super Bowl, the area highlighted there, I don't want pointing at the screen, none of you can see, the area highlighted there was really affected by the Super Bowl, and prices went up. But people who were on the periphery, they couldn't get what they were hoping for. They put it up for $1,000 a night, and nobody was interested in being all the way up in Morningside Lenox Park. It wasn't available for them. But other events that are much more localized for that area, they could capitalize on what was happening. I think there was a music festival around there at a different time, and that area, the rates all blew up, but downtown Atlanta never moved. So being able to think about what is the local area, what is the event that's causing a change. So this is the final output of our modeling. This is, when I was doing review, I am more on the revenue side than the product development side. So when I would speak to the product team, the data science team, they would continually show me these charts. I'm still not entirely sure what they mean. So what it's trying to show me is, on these charts, that these are the predicted rates for different days going forward. And then these are so the recommended rate is the orange line. So this is what our model was saying, this is the rate you should charge for all these dates into the future. And then when, I think this was you, and then we're seeing what the rates actually are over time. And so, your model's performing well when your green dots are hitting the orange line. So when we look at this, as I said, far into the future, it's very hard, and we've capped our price recommendations at 6 months. In 9 months, 10 months, a typical data company isn't picking up enough information to be able to give great rate recommendations. So for now, it's up to you humans to continue to do what the machines can't. Okay, that's everything from me. Thanks very much for your time, and feel free to come over to our booth and talk about what might be interesting to you, but I hope that was instructive for you.
Thank you, Tom. Excellent. Before I let you go, there's a few questions I would like to ask you. Obviously, data source is something super important. And when you talk about market and addressable market and all the base data on markets, you only capture what is online, right? So nobody has talked about offline market share and offline market in terms of distribution, market availability. I know for a fact, we had this discussion a lot at Focusrite, right? We did a lot of studies in the short-term rental industry, and we always had massive debates, how much deviates that data because we don't capture the offline market, and there's still a lot of it. I can give you an example of a market like Germany is a massive offline market still. A lot of inventory is still with DMOs. They might be listed on a website, but you will not capture that inventory. So my question is, how much does that sort of deviate in total, what the offline market share is, and how much does that impact pricing and revenue management overall?
Yeah, you're right, Simon. Some of the numbers you see sometimes, it's ungodly how much supply is offline. I remember seeing once 12 million in the US vacation homes, and on both platforms there's just more than 1 million maybe, so that is what the online supply is, only 10%. Of course, that supply, is it real supply? I mean, that's, I'm talking my own book, but also you have to if you're on a competitive marketplace and that supply isn't online anywhere, then it's just someone's second home that they occasionally rent out. I think more material is some of the vacation rental markets that you guys come from, where you built out such a good reputation that you can eschew Airbnb and Vrbo because you don't like their fees, you've got a good marketing engine. It's not one, we've looked at how we could go about solving that, and you think as a company, how could you go about solving it? It is intense to think about picking up every property management company in Destin, of which there's maybe 80, sourcing out and separating the supply as to who's online so you're not double counting again, then trying to find out by maybe scraping their websites or maybe a data partnership, there's a lot of them, to isolate that supply. And I think you're right, it's a flaw in the data scraping methodology. There is pros and cons to everything, but it's not a lot for a company like ours or beyond price and price labs who's trying to grab so much masses. We just have to hope that by getting 60% of the supply, that is a material number to think about your pricing. If 60% of the market is doing this, that should be statistically significant to inform good pricing, but it's an imperfection, you're right.
Okay. You talked about pirates. I love that. That got me started. And then you said you're now working for the Navy, right? Are you really working for the Navy? Or are you not still a pirate? I mean, a big source of your data is actually scraping data, right? And let's talk about scraping data and what happens if that is going to stop. So are you working for the Navy, or are you still a pirate, or are you somewhere in between when you're talking about scraping data?
Yeah, scraping data. So when we first set up this company, it was feeling very piratical, is that a word? On the edge of the law. And we would, every day, we'd just have this fear. Well, we don't really have a company at the moment, so, there's nothing to lose. This fear that a lawyer from Airbnb, say, would wheel in 400 boxes of depositions, and we'd look at our $5,000 in the bank account and just, we're done. But I'd say of the top 20 fears I have about this business, it's maybe 18 or 19, because we've built up dialogues with these firms, and there is definitely a change of thought that it's an ecosystem that benefits them. They need us. They don't try and stop us anymore. There's no restrictions on how they, from a technical perspective, try to prevent the scraping. They feel that, see, we can go out in a way that Airbnb can't and say, you should buy this house, you'll get a 33% cap rate, it's a great return on investment, in a way that Airbnb could not do that. They have their political situations they have to think about all the time. And so we have a dialogue with both of them, and I think they appreciate everyone in this ecosystem, what they add. So is it piracy? I don't think it is. You know, if you put it online, I mean, that's what the legal precedent says. If you put it online, that is public information, it is available. Can a big company try and stop us? Yes, if they're really angry enough about it through just burying us in the law or all these other things. But it doesn't seem to be at all the feeling in Vrbo or Airbnb that that's something they want to pursue because they see the value it adds to the ecosystem. So what am I? I don't think that makes me the Navy. I'm not a pirate. Maybe,
we'll leave that where it is.
A gun for hire, maybe? I don't know.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Caton, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ivan.